Delivery. The word came out before Lena Foster looked all the way up at the man who had just walked into the lobby. The glass door was still slightly ajar, letting a draft of cold air from the street creep across the black mat in front of her desk, while on the large screen behind her, the text about equal opportunity in leadership scrolled by. Just like any other morning. It was 8:47 a.m. Not long after the headquarters of Harbour and Smith Capital had opened. The stone floor was still clean. The ceiling lights were bright, and the reception desk ran the length of the private elevator bank. To the left of the entrance was a small table with a sign-in book for suppliers. Ethan Brooks walked in alone, wearing a dark, half-zipped hoodie, faded jeans, and low-profile sneakers. He held a phone in his left hand. His right hand was empty. He wore no visitor badge, and no one was with him. He walked straight to the desk. Lena Foster's eyes traveled from his shoes, up to the zipper on his hoodie, and only then to his face. Delivery. No, I'm going to the executive floor. Lena Foster lifted her head a little higher, turned to the appointment screen in front of her, and asked curtly, "Do you have an appointment?" "No, I'll wait." She typed the name Ethan Brooks into the pre-registered guest list. The name didn't pop up. She didn't check the internal access list, didn't ask which department had invited him, and didn't call the executive floor coordinator to verify. Instead, Lena Foster pulled a form from a stack of papers to her right, pushed it halfway across the counter, and placed a pen chained to the desk on top of it. "Sign your name here." Ethan Brooks looked down at the paper. It was the sign-in sheet for suppliers using the service entrance. He didn't pick up the pen. "I'm not making a delivery." Lena Foster didn't take the form back. She turned to her colleague sitting next to her and lowered her voice, but not so low that the words stayed behind the counter. "Don't let this one sit in the VIP chairs." Just to the right of the lobby was the waiting area for high-level guests. A small reserved sign was already placed on a chair near an outlet. From the revolving door, Owen Price walked over, his security jacket zipped up, an earpiece in one ear, his hand holding a radio at his hip. He didn't ask for a name first. He looked at Ethan Brooks's shoes, then pointed toward the service entrance with 2 fingers. "Delivery entrance is on the side." "No, I'm waiting here." Owen Price glanced at the reception desk. Lena Foster gave a slight nod toward the bench right against the glass door, where the cold draft was still gusting in. The reserved sign was moved pointedly to the chair by the outlet. The other chair was left empty. Ethan Brooks said nothing more, just walked to the bench, sat down on the far end, and placed his phone on his lap. From where he sat, he was about 6 steps from the counter, close enough to clearly see the meeting schedule on the monitor, the supplier sign-in table, and the private elevator to the executive floor. A catering employee walked by with a tray of paper coffee cups and set 2 of them on the counter. One had Lena Foster written on it. The other was handed to her colleague. No one asked Ethan Brooks if he wanted any water. On the large screen behind them, the corporate slideshow continued, cycling through photos of different groups of people in dark suits. The caption about expanding leadership opportunities still running at the bottom. Ethan Brooks opened his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and stopped on a notes app. He looked at the supplier form still sitting on the edge of the glass counter. He looked at the empty chair by the outlet. He looked at the side entrance Owen Price had just pointed to. 10 minutes later, the private elevator opened, and Greg Sutton walked into the lobby with a tablet tucked under his arm. Lena Foster called him over, saying someone wanted to go up to the executive floor. Greg Sutton stopped and looked at the hoodie first, then at Ethan Brooks's face. "You're in the wrong place." Ethan Brooks stood up from the bench. "No, I'm in the right place." Greg Sutton didn't ask which department invited him, didn't call to verify with the coordinator, and didn't look at the access system. He just turned halfway toward the reception desk, glanced at Owen Price, and spoke just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "If he's still here, call for backup." Greg Sutton stepped back into the private elevator. Ethan Brooks opened his phone and started typing a note. Greg Sutton went into the private elevator, and Ethan Brooks remained standing by the bench, phone open in his hand. Owen Price shifted his position, moving closer to the glass door, holding his radio to his chest. Lena Foster pulled the supplier form back toward the edge of the counter, as if she intended to leave it there all morning. Ethan Brooks did not sign it. He sat back down, looked at the meeting schedule behind the counter, and typed another line in his notes. For the next 3 days, Ethan Brooks did not appear in the main lobby like that again. He used an internal access card issued by the parent company, entering through the employee entrance on the south side of the building, through slower revolving glass doors, and taking the service elevators up to the work floors. His name wasn't on the visitor list, but his access rights for the executive floors were already in the system. Every time he scanned his card, the small light on the reader turned from red to green, and every time, the hallway cameras recorded his entry time. On Monday morning, Ethan Brooks sat at the end of the 12th floor operations conference room, with a thin notebook and an unopened cup of black coffee in front of him. Monica Hayes stood near the presentation screen, holding a remote. On the board was a diagram of delivery routes and wait times at the 3 main warehouses. She spoke briefly, pointed to a bottleneck on the western route, then switched to the cost chart. Just as Monica Hayes finished her last point, Todd Mercer, sitting at the head of the table, leaned forward. "Let's put a pin in that. There's a simpler way." Monica Hayes turned off the screen. She sat down. No one asked to see the data again. The meeting moved on to another topic. Ethan Brooks looked at the list of speakers on the printed agenda in front of him, then drew a short line under Monica Hayes' name. That same afternoon, he ran into her at the coffee station near the east-facing windows. On the counter was a large coffee urn, 2 boxes of sugar packets, and a tray of white cups pushed to one side. Monica Hayes poured half a cup, set it down, and grabbed a plastic lid from a stack behind the cups. "I saw your presentation this morning." Monica Hayes looked up. So, it was a solid plan. She gave a single nod, not saying anything right away. After a few seconds, Monica Hayes pulled out a chair and sat down at the round table against the wall. She opened a black-covered notebook and flipped to a page with a yellow sticky note on it. On that page were the names of 3 team leads she had trained, all of whom now outranked her on the new organizational chart posted in the hallway. Ethan Brooks saw that chart as he left the coffee area. Next to the door was a bulletin board announcing the new quarterly leadership development program. All 10 photos on the board were of people in dark suits. Greg Sutton was in the middle of the front row. On Tuesday afternoon, Charles Reed from IT stood in Greg Sutton's office with a thick, stapled printout of the system logs. Along the margins were access times, folder names, and every instance of someone opening files in operations, HR, and the folder related to the acquisition. Greg Sutton put his pen down, pulled the stack of papers toward him, and flipped quickly through the pages with his fingertip. "Save all these logs." Charles Reed nodded. "Should I notify HR?" Greg Sutton looked up. "Do it now." The next morning, Monica Hayes stepped out of the elevator on the 12th floor and stopped in front of the meeting schedule mounted on the wall. Her name was no longer on the list for the 9 o'clock recurring operations meeting. 10 minutes later, Kelsey Morgan from HR stood at the entrance to the work area, holding a thin gray folder. She spoke quietly, just loud enough for Monica Hayes to hear, then led the way toward the glass-walled office at the end of the hall. "Come with me for a minute." Monica Hayes put her ID card on the desk, locked her computer, and followed. The glass door closed behind them. Out in the hallway, Ethan Brooks was standing by the vending machine around the corner, holding his phone and watching through the glass, which reflected the ceiling lights. On the desk in front of Kelsey Morgan was a printout of an internal email, Monica Hayes' desk access history, and a request form to review her communications. Ethan Brooks took out his phone, typed a short message, and sent it from the hallway of the 12th floor. The glass door on the 12th floor was still closed when Ethan Brooks left the hallway. The message he sent went straight to the legal team, the digital audit group, and the parent company's representative office. Over the next 2 days, Monica Hayes was removed from the operations meeting group. Her editing privileges for certain data tables were revoked, and her desk was moved down to the records area on a lower floor, between 2 metal filing cabinets and an old printer pushed against the wall. On the system, spreadsheets with Monica Hayes' name on them showed new edits that were made after she had already logged out. Outside of the office, a local business paper published a photo of Ethan Brooks in a hoodie in the lobby, with a short caption questioning his inside access. Ethan Brooks didn't respond to the press. For the next 12 days, he didn't show up at the main office, while the legal and digital audit teams gathered every email, every file edit history, every hallway camera recording, every folder access log, and every change in access permissions. On the morning of the 13th day, Monica Hayes got to her new desk and found a large manila envelope sitting right on her keyboard. Inside were printouts of data modification timestamps, login histories, and lines clearly showing which accounts had opened the files after she had left the system. The last page had no title, just a single, very short, handwritten line. You were never in there alone. That afternoon, Monica Hayes walked into a rented office space near the river. Ethan Brooks sat at a long table by the window. In front of him was a computer, a hard drive, paper files, and an invitation to the quarterly shareholders meeting. He turned the monitor toward Monica Hayes. On it was a timeline, starting with the lobby camera footage from the first day, to the access logs, to the internal emails between Greg Sutton, Charles Reed, and Gavin Cole, the board member who had sided with Greg Sutton in closed-door meetings. Monica Hayes sat down, opened the folder of paper files, and flipped through each page, following the timestamps printed in the right-hand corner. 3 days later, the hotel ballroom where the company was holding its shareholders' meeting was packed early. Greg Sutton was on stage with a projector behind him and a presentation on operational stability on the big screen. He had just gotten through his opening remarks when the doors at the back of the hall opened. Ethan Brooks walked in, wearing a dark gray suit, accompanied by Monica Hayes and 2 representatives from the parent company. The 4 of them walked straight to the front. Monica Hayes placed a stack of files on the table in front of the board members' seats. Ethan Brooks took the presentation remote, stopped next to the podium, and looked up at the screen. We're stopping the presentation here. Greg Sutton lowered his hand from the clicker. You're not on the schedule to speak. Ethan Brooks showed his owner's access card to the board secretary in the front row. The secretary looked at the card, then at the list in front of her, and stood up to let him pass. The screen behind Greg Sutton changed from a growth chart to the lobby camera footage from that first morning. Right after that came the printed access logs, internal emails, file edit histories, and an audio recording from the meeting room where the altered data was used to pin the blame on Monica Hayes. Monica Hayes walked along the row of board members, placing a set of files in front of each person. Play this entire file. Ruth Bennett, the chairwoman of the board, stood up after looking at the first 3 pages. She put her hand on the edge of the table, looked at Greg Sutton, then over to the head of internal security standing near the side door. Step away from the microphone. Now. Greg Sutton didn't say another word. He put his papers down, stepped off the stage, and walked toward the seats on the left. In less than an hour, Greg Sutton's executive access was shut down on the system. His name disappeared from the leadership schedule for the following week, and his personnel file was flagged for legal review. That same day, Gavin Cole sent a notice of his resignation from the board. That evening, at a meeting with investors, Ethan Brooks stood on a small stage with a folded piece of paper in his hand. He said he didn't end up with this company in his portfolio by accident. Before he even closed the deal, he had a file on Greg Sutton, on his closed-door hiring decisions, and on the meetings that always revolved around the same group of people. Ethan Brooks also said he knew Gavin Cole from before, through an old family connection. Then he put the paper down, looked out over the tables below, and said that the morning in the lobby had just confirmed everything the file said. 6 months later, Monica Hayes sat in a corner office with a new title on her nameplate. The leadership development program was replaced with a selection process that required documented minutes. And the main lobby of Harbour & Smith Capital added a mandatory internal verification step before the receptionist was allowed to deny someone access to the executive floor. The new hire introduction boards in the main hallway were completely updated with new photos, and Monica Hayes started leading the presentations on the company's new procedures. The internal memos sent to all staff didn't mention Greg Sutton much. They just listed the changes to access rights, selection criteria, and new reporting lines. If that were you, would you have left the lobby right then? Or would you have stayed and watched? Like Ethan Brooks. If you think this story is worth a closer look at how a place really works, share this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the Power Misplaced Stories channel.